A signature on a deed usually marks a new beginning, but for the matriarch Victoria Montgomery, it marked the violent end of a 40-year reign. Standing in the pouring rain outside the iron gates of the sprawling Oak Hollow estate, she watched the new owner's black SUV sweep up the driveway, splashing mud onto her designer trench coat. She expected a stranger, a faceless corporation, or perhaps a foreign investor to step out. She never expected the tinted window to roll down and reveal the face of the woman she had thrown onto the street exactly 7 years ago with nothing but a diaper bag. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but seeing the terror in her ex-mother-in-law's eyes, that was scorching hot. The air inside the library of the Montgomery estate was always 5 degrees colder than the rest of the house, but tonight it felt like a morgue. The room smelled of old paper, brandy, and the specific brand of arrogance that comes from 3 generations of unchecked wealth. Isabel stood in the center of the Persian rug, clutching her 3-week-old son, Noah, to her chest. Her legs were trembling. She had just been discharged from Jude's hospital after a complicated C-section, and her incision still burned with every small movement. But physical pain was nothing compared to the icy stare of Victoria Montgomery. Victoria sat behind the massive mahogany desk, a single sheet of paper resting before her. To her right stood Charles Montgomery, looking out the window at the manicured gardens, refusing to make eye contact. And in the corner, staring at his shoes, was Ethan. "Ethan?" Isobel whispered, her voice cracking. "What is going on? Why are my bags packed in the hallway?" Ethan didn't look up. He swirled the ice in his scotch glass, the clinking sound echoing in the silence. "Show her, Victoria," Charles said from the window, his voice bored, as if he were ordering dinner rather than dismantling a life. Victoria slid the paper across the desk. It was a document from Genetics Lab Services. It was a paternity test. Isobel shifted Noah to her other arm and picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the medical jargon until they landed on the bottom line, highlighted in red. Probability of paternity, 0%. The room spun. This is wrong," Isobel stammered, looking from Victoria to Ethan. "This is a mistake. Ethan, you know this is a mistake. You're the only man I've ever been with. Don't lie to us, you little gold digger," Victoria snapped, her voice like a whip crack. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "We knew from the moment Ethan brought you home, a waitress from a diner in New Jersey, that you were looking for a payout. But to pin a bastard child on the Montgomery line? That is a level of audacity even I didn't expect." "Ethan!" Isobel screamed, turning to her husband. "Look at him. Look at Noah. He has your nose. He has your eyes. Tell them." Ethan finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but they weren't filled with love. They were filled with a weak, pathetic resolve. He had always been a man who preferred the path of least resistance, and defying his mother was a path he had never dared to walk. "The test doesn't lie, Isobel," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "My mother had it run twice. Just go." "I haven't been with anyone else." Isobel was crying now, hot tears falling onto Noah's sleeping face. The baby began to stir and wail. "Victoria, please, let me get another test. Let me go to a different lab. I'll pay for it." Victoria laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "And drag our name through the mud? Have the tabloids speculate on Ethan's cuckoldry? Absolutely not. You signed a prenuptial agreement, Isobel. It has a deeply specific infidelity clause. You get nothing. No alimony, no settlement, no car." Victoria pressed a button on her desk phone. "Jenkins? Escort Miss Carter off the premises. Immediately." "It's pouring rain outside," Isobel pleaded, clutching Noah tighter. "I have nowhere to go. My parents are dead. I have no money in my account. Please, just let me stay the night. For the baby." Charles turned from the window. "That child is not a Montgomery. Therefore, he is not our concern." The heavy oak doors creaked open. Jenkins, the head of security, stepped in. He looked apologetic, his eyes softening as he saw the baby, but he valued his paycheck too much to intervene. "Ma'am," Jenkins said softly, "please, don't make me drag you." Isobel looked at Ethan one last time. He had turned his back to her, pouring another drink. The betrayal hit her harder than the poverty facing her. He knew. Deep down, he had to know. But he was choosing his inheritance over the truth. "You will regret this," Isabel whispered, her voice suddenly steady, a steel rod inserting itself into her spine. "All of you." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "The only thing I regret is not vetting you harder. Get out." Jenkins placed a hand on Isabel's shoulder and guided her out. As they walked through the marble foyer, past the portraits of Montgomery ancestors who seemed to glare down at her, the front door was thrown open. The storm outside was violent. Thunder rattled the window panes. "I put your suitcases under the gazebo so they wouldn't get too wet," Jenkins muttered, slipping a $50 bill into her hand. "Take the bus at the end of the lane. It goes to the city. I'm sorry, Isabel." The heavy door slammed shut behind her. Isabel stood in the dark, the rain instantly soaking her thin blouse. Noah screamed against her chest, cold and confused. She dragged her 2 suitcases toward the road, the wheels getting stuck in the gravel, the mud ruining her shoes. She walked for a mile, in the freezing rain, until she reached the bus stop. She huddled under the cracked plastic shelter, shivering uncontrollably. She looked down at Noah, who was wrapped in the expensive cashmere blanket Victoria had bought for the photo ops, now stained with rain. "I promise you," she whispered to the crying infant, her teeth chattering, "I don't know how, and I don't know when, but I am going to buy that house, and I am going to burn their lives to the ground." The bus headlights cut through the dark. Isabel Carter stepped onto the bus, leaving the Montgomery name behind, but carrying a hatred that would fuel her for a decade. The transition from silk sheets at Oak Hollow to a mildew-infested basement apartment in Queens was jarring. For the first 6 months, Isabel operated on survival instincts alone. The $50 Jenkins had given her covered diapers and formula for 3 days. After that, reality set in with brutal efficiency. She couldn't get a high-paying job. She had dropped out of her interior design program to marry Ethan, convinced by his promises that she would never need to work. Now, that gap in her resume was a black hole. She found work at a 24-hour laundromat called Suds and Duds. The owner, a gruff Greek man named Mr. Karras, let her bring Noah to work as long as he stayed in his carrier behind the counter. The drama of her life wasn't sweeping orchestras anymore. It was the quiet, grinding drama of poverty. It was choosing between paying the electric bill or buying fresh vegetables. It was washing her clothes in the laundromat sinks after hours to save quarters. One Tuesday in November, the lowest point arrived. Isabel was folding towels when a sleek Mercedes parked in front of the laundromat. Her heart hammered. Had Ethan come for her? Had he realized the mistake? A woman stepped out. It wasn't Ethan. It was Tiffany Street James. Tiffany was everything Isabel wasn't. Blonde, comprised mostly of plastic surgery and old money, and the daughter of a senator. She had been Victoria's first choice for Ethan. Tiffany walked in, holding a dry cleaning bag. She spotted Isabel and stopped, a cruel smirk spreading across her face. "Oh my God," Tiffany laughed, pulling out her phone. "Isabel, is that you? Victoria told me you were struggling, but this is tragic." Isabel gripped the edge of the counter. "What do you want, Tiffany?" "Just dropping off some things." "The service at my usual place is slipping," Tiffany said, tossing a silk dress onto the counter. "Be careful with that. It cost more than your rent for the year." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "By the way, save the date. Ethan and I are getting married in the spring. At Oak Hollow, of course. We're turning the nursery, you know, the one you decorated, into a walk-in closet for me. We just didn't need the bad energy." Isabel felt the bile rise in her throat. Ethan knows that baby is his. "Ethan knows what his bank account balance requires him to know," Tiffany replied breezily. "And honestly, nobody cares. You're yesterday's news, sweetie. You're a ghost." Tiffany snapped a photo of Isabel in her stained apron and walked out. That night, Isabel sat on the floor of her apartment, staring at the photo Tiffany had posted on Instagram. The caption read, "Number how the mighty fall. grateful for my blessings. Isabel looked at Noah, who was playing with a wooden spoon, his only toy. She felt a shift. Sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold calculation. Interior design? She muttered to herself. I was good at it. I was better than all of them. She didn't have a degree, and she didn't have connections. But she had rage. The next day, Isabel did something reckless. She used her rent money to buy a second-hand laptop and a subscription to a design software. She created a profile on a freelance site under the alias IC Designs. She started small, one-room makeovers for people on tight budgets. She worked 18 hours a day. She would work her shift at the laundromat, put Noah to sleep, and design until 4 a.m. Her break came 3 years later in the form of a bad review. A wealthy tech mogul, Damon Ridley, had hired a prestigious firm to renovate his penthouse in Manhattan. They had botched it. It was cold, sterile, and soulless. Damon posted a rant on a niche architecture forum, asking if anyone understood warm minimalism. Isabel saw the post at 2 a.m. She spent the next 6 hours rendering a 3D model of his living room based on the photos he posted. She sent it to him with a simple message. They didn't understand the light. You need warmth, not just white space. Fix it like this. Damon replied 10 minutes later, Who are you? I'm the person who can save your penthouse, she typed back. Damon Ridley was eccentric, impatient, and incredibly rich. He hired her on the spot to consult. When he saw the finished product, he was floored. You have an eye, Isabel, Damon told her, standing in the newly renovated space overlooking Central Park. You see things others miss. Why are you working at a laundromat? Because I was erased, Isabel said, staring out at the city skyline. And I'm trying to draw myself back in. Damon handed her a check. It was for $50,000. Start a firm. I have friends. I'll tell them about you. But you need a name, not I.C. Designs. Something bold. Isabel looked at the check. It was enough to move out of the basement. Enough to get Noah into a decent preschool. Phoenix Interiors, she said. A bit cliché, isn't it? Rising from the ashes? Damon asked. Not if you're the one who set the fire, Isabel replied darkly. The years began to blur. 5 years turned into 7. Phoenix Interiors exploded. Isabel's style, a mix of classic European architecture and modern functionality, became the it look for the New York elite. She was relentless. She didn't date. She didn't take vacations. She raised Noah, who was now a bright, curious 7-year-old, and she built her empire. She kept tabs on the Montgomerys. She knew the market was shifting. She knew Charles Montgomery had made risky bets on cryptocurrency and offshore drilling that were tanking. She knew Ethan and Tiffany were spending money faster than it could be printed. She was waiting for the crack in the armor. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Isabel was in her glass-walled office in Tribeca when her assistant, Sarah, walked in with the Financial Times. You told me to set an alert for Montgomery Holdings, Sarah said, placing the paper on the desk. Isabel looked down. The headline was small, buried on page 6, but to her, it was screaming in neon lights. Montgomery Family Estate, Oak Hollow, listed for auction following bankruptcy filing. Isabel picked up the phone. She dialed her personal attorney, a shark named Marcus Thorne. Wait, no, Marcus is banned. A shark named Robert Sterling. No, Sterling is banned. She dialed her attorney, David Ross. David, she said, her voice calm, clear my schedule for next week and get the liquidity ready. Are we buying a new office building? David asked. No, Isabel said, swiveling her chair to look at the photo of Noah on her desk. We're buying a haunted house. Haunted? Haunted by my past, Isabel said. I want to buy Oak Hollow, but I want to do it through a shell company. They cannot know it's me until the ink is dry. The auction is a sealed bid, David warned. You'll have to go significantly over market value to guarantee it. I don't care about the price, Isabel said. I care about the look on Victoria's face. Offer them 20% over asking. Cash. Fast close. The trap was set. Now, she just had to walk back into the lion's den. The conference room at Ross Gable, and Associates, was situated on the 40th floor, offering a panoramic view of a city that didn't care about failures. Victoria Montgomery sat at the long glass table, her posture rigid. She was wearing a Chanel suit that was 3 seasons old, a detail that burned her pride more than the bankruptcy itself. Beside her, Charles looked like a deflated balloon. The stress of the last year, the failed investments, and the humiliation of the audit had aged him 20 years. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, looking anywhere but at his parents. Tiffany was filing her nails, looking bored, though the nervous tapping of her foot betrayed her anxiety. "This is an outrage," Victoria hissed, though her voice lacked its usual venomous bite. "To be forced to sell Oak Hollow, and to a blind trust? We don't even know who is buying our legacy." David Ross, Isabel's attorney, sat opposite them. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. He adjusted his glasses and slid a thick stack of documents across the table. "The buyer wishes to remain anonymous until the deed is transferred. Mrs. Montgomery," David said calmly. "The offer is cash. It covers the outstanding mortgage, the liens from the IRS, and leaves you with a modest sum to restart." "Modest?" Tiffany scoffed, finally looking up. "It's barely enough to get a penthouse on the Upper East Side. How are we supposed to live?" "You aren't," Charles muttered, rubbing his temples. "We're lucky we aren't going to prison, Tiffany. Just sign the damn papers." Victoria picked up the Mont Blanc pen. Her hand trembled. For 40 years, she had been the queen of Oak Hollow. She had hosted senators, dukes, and captains of industry. She had kicked out her own daughter-in-law to protect the purity of this estate, and now she was signing it away to a shell company named Phoenix Holdings. She signed. "Done," David said, pulling the papers back immediately. "Funds will be wired to your creditors within the hour. The keys must be surrendered at 5 p.m. today." "Today?" Victoria stood up, knocking her chair back. "That is impossible. We have movers coming tomorrow. We have heirlooms." The terms were clear. Victoria, Charles said, defeated. Immediate possession. The buyer allowed us to keep personal effects, but the furniture, the art, the estate itself, it's gone. The drive back to Oak Hollow was silent, a funeral procession in a convoy of 2 cars. When they arrived at the estate, the sky had turned a bruised purple, threatening a storm. It felt fitting. The house, once a beacon of pristine white stone, looked tired. The landscaping budget had been cut 2 years ago, and weeds were creeping through the gravel driveway. The fountain was dry, filled with dead leaves. "I can't believe this," Ethan said, as he stepped out of his car, looking up at his childhood home. "Where are we going to go tonight?" "The Street Regis," Victoria snapped, trying to regain control. "We will stay there until I figure out a way to sue this buyer for duress." "There is no duress, Mother," Ethan sighed. "We're broke." They spent the next 3 hours frantically packing jewelry, clothes, and small personal items into boxes. The grand rooms echoed with their footsteps. The servants had been let go months ago. Only Jenkins, the loyal security guard, remained, working pro bono out of misplaced loyalty. At 4:55 p.m., Jenkins knocked on the open library door. "Mrs. Montgomery?" Jenkins said, looking uncomfortable. "There's a car coming up the drive, black SUV, security detail." "The vultures are early," Victoria spat. She grabbed her handbag, a crocodile Hermes that she had refused to sell even when the electricity was threatened. "Let's go. I want to look this new owner in the eye and tell them that they may own the stone, but they will never have the class to inhabit Oak Hollow." The family gathered on the front steps. The rain began to fall, a light drizzle at first, then a steady, cold pour. It was almost exactly the same weather as that night 7 years ago. The black SUV, a gleaming Escalade with tinted windows, crunched up the gravel and came to a halt. Victoria straightened her spine. Charles lit a cigar, his hand shaking. Tiffany crossed her arms, ready to critique the new owner's outfit. Ethan looked ready to vomit. The driver's door opened first. A large man in a suit stepped out and opened a black umbrella. He walked around to the rear passenger door and pulled it open. A pair of red-bottomed Louboutin heels stepped onto the wet gravel. Then came the legs, clad in tailored black trousers. Then the trench coat, a bespoke Burberry piece, worth more than Tiffany's car. The umbrella was raised, and the woman stepped into the light. Victoria gasped. The sound was audible over the rain. Isabel removed her sunglasses. Her face was older, sharper. The baby fat was gone, replaced by high cheekbones and a jawline that could cut glass. Her hair, once a messy, frizzy halo, was now a sleek, glossy bob that screamed power. "Hello, Victoria," Isabel said. Her voice was smooth, rich, and terrifyingly calm. Ethan dropped his phone. It clattered onto the stone steps, the screen shattering. "Isabel? You?" Tiffany shrieked, her voice cracking. "You bought this? With what money? You were scrubbing floors." Isabel didn't even look at Tiffany. She kept her eyes locked on Victoria. Interior design pays well when you're the best in the city, and when you have the motivation of a mother scorned. This is a joke," Charles stammered. "You're the buyer? Phoenix Holdings?" "Phoenix," Isabel repeated, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "Because you burned my life down, Charles. Did you think I wouldn't rise from the ashes?" She took a step forward. The Montgomerys instinctively took a step back, huddled together like frightened sheep. "You have 5 minutes to get off my property," Isabel said, checking her diamond watch. "Jenkins has the new codes. After 5 minutes, you're trespassing." "You can't do this," Victoria cried, her face flushing red. "This is my home. I have lived here for 40 years. I am a Montgomery." "And I," Isabel said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a sledgehammer, "was a Montgomery too, until you decided I wasn't. Now, I'm the landlord. Get out." The silence following Isabel's command was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the pavement. "Wait," Ethan stepped forward, his face pale and sweaty. He looked from Isabel to the car, then back to Isabel. "Isabel, please, we can talk about this. We're family." Isabel laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and metallic. "Family? You stood in that library 7 years ago and watched your mother throw me into a thunderstorm with a 3-week-old baby. You chose your inheritance over your wife and son." "Don't use that word." "Son," Ethan whispered. "Noah. Where is he?" Isabel turned back to the SUV. She made a subtle motion with her hand. The rear door on the other side opened. A boy stepped out. Noah was 7 years old. He was tall for his age, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a sketchbook. But it wasn't his clothes that made the Montgomerys freeze. It was his face. He had the Montgomery chin, the distinctive, slightly crooked nose that Charles had and that Ethan had. He had Ethan's exact eyes, a piercing, steel blue. To look at him was to look at a clone of Ethan at age 7. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. The carefully constructed, expensive lie that the DNA test had been shattered in an instant. There was no denying biology when it was staring you in the face. "He looks just like..." Tiffany started, then trailed off, realizing the implications for her own marriage. "He looks like his father," Isobel finished. She put a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Noah, this is the house I told you about, the one we're going to fix." Noah looked at the shivering group of adults on the stairs with mild disinterest. "It looks sad, Mom. It needs painting." "It needs a gut renovation," Isobel corrected. She looked back at Victoria. "The 5 minutes are ticking. Jenkins, please escort the guests to the gate." "Isobel, wait." Victoria lunged forward, grabbing Isobel's sleeve. "We can work something out. The DNA test. The lab must have made a mistake. I'll fire them. We can be a family again. Noah needs his grandmother." Isobel shook Victoria's hand off as if it were a spider. "Noah has a family," Isobel said. "He has me, and he has the friends who helped us when you left us to starve. You aren't his grandmother, Victoria. You're just the woman who used to own his house." She turned to Jenkins. "Make sure they take nothing that was listed in the inventory. If they try to take the art, call the police." "Yes, miss." "Carter," Jenkins said, a hint of a smile on his face for the first time in years. Isobel took Noah's hand and walked past them, up the stairs, and through the massive front doors. She didn't look back. Inside, the house smelled of neglect. Dust motes danced in the dim light of the chandelier. The grand staircase, once the centerpiece of the home, had a scuff mark on the railing. "It's big," Noah whispered, his voice echoing. "It is," Isobel said. She felt a strange hollowness. She had expected to feel triumphant, and she did. But she also felt the weight of the ghosts in these walls. "Why are those people crying outside?" Noah asked. "Because they made bad choices, Noah. And bad choices have consequences." Suddenly, the front door banged open. Isobel spun around. It was Tiffany. She was soaked, her mascara running down her face, looking like a deranged raccoon. She marched into the foyer, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble. "You think you've won?" Tiffany screamed. "You think because you have some money now, you're better than us? You're still trash, Isobel? You're still the waitress?" Isobel sighed. "Tiffany, you're dripping on my marble. I'm not leaving until I get my wedding dress," Tiffany yelled. "It's in the master suite closet. It's Vera Wang." "Actually," Isobel said, tilting her head, "everything in the house, as of 5 p.m., is mine. That includes the contents of the closets. But—" Isobel paused. She remembered the day Tiffany had come into the laundromat and mocked her. She remembered the photo on Instagram. "I'm feeling generous. Go get your dress." Tiffany blinked, surprised by the concession. She sneered. Finally, some respect. She stomped up the stairs. "Mom, who is she?" Noah asked. "Someone who is about to be very disappointed," Isobel murmured. She knew something Tiffany didn't. During the pre-closing inspection, which Isobel had done under a disguise, wearing a hard hat and mask, posing as a structural engineer, she had seen the state of the master closet. A minute later, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the second floor. Tiffany came running to the top of the stairs, holding a mass of white silk that was covered in green-black mold. "My dress!" she wailed. "The roof leaked. Why didn't anyone fix the roof?" Isobel looked up, her expression deadpan. "I guess Charles couldn't afford the repairs. Shame. That mold looks difficult to remove." Tiffany threw the ruined dress down the stairs. It landed with a wet plop at Isobel's feet. "I hate you!" Tiffany screamed. "Get out, Tiffany," Isobel said, her voice turning hard again. "Before I charge you for the cleaning bill to sanitize the foyer." Defeated, Tiffany ran out the door, sobbing. Isobel took a deep breath. The house was empty of them now. It was just her and Noah. "Mom?" Noah tugged on her hand. "Can I see my room? You said I had a room here when I was a baby." Isobel's heart tightened. "Yes, it's down the hall." They walked down the long corridor to the east wing. Isobel stopped in front of a white door. She hesitated. She hadn't been in this room since the day Jenkins dragged her out. She pushed the door open. The room was exactly as she had left it. The crib was there, the changing table, the mobile with the little felt stars she had sewn herself. But it was wrong. The room was filled with boxes. It had been used as a storage unit. Stacks of old tax returns, broken lamps, and discarded exercise equipment were piled high, blocking the crib. Victoria hadn't just kicked them out. She had turned Noah's existence into a junk drawer. Isobel felt a surge of anger so pure, it almost made her dizzy. But then, she saw something sticking out of a box near the closet. It was a file folder, bright red. It was labeled, "Medical Records, Private, Victoria." Isobel walked over, stepping over a broken stair-stepper. She pulled the file out. It wasn't the DNA test. It was an invoice. An invoice from a private investigator named Saul Berenson. And stapled to it was a receipt from Genetics Lab Services for a priority rush alteration service. Isobel's hands shook as she opened the folder. There were emails, printed emails between Victoria and the lab technician. From V. Montgomery to Lab Tech. 4. Subject: The problem. 4. I don't care what the blood says. The result needs to be negative. I will wire the remaining $50,000 when the PDF is edited. He cannot be a Montgomery. I have a better match for Ethan arranged. Isobel gasped. She had always known it was a lie, but she thought they had just faked a document. She didn't realize there was a paper trail. She didn't realize Victoria had been stupid enough to keep the receipt. Mom? Noah asked, looking at the dusty crib. Is this where I slept? Isobel looked at her son, then at the smoking gun in her hand. Yes, baby, she said, her voice trembling with a terrifying mix of vindication and fury. But we aren't sleeping here tonight. Why? Because, Isobel said, clutching the file, we have one more stop to make. We're going to pay a visit to the police station. She looked out the window. The taillights of the Montgomery's cars were just fading at the end of the driveway. They took everything from me using a piece of paper, Isobel whispered to the empty room. Now, I'm going to use a piece of paper to put them in a cage. She pulled out her phone and dialed David Ross. David, don't go home yet, she said. I found it. I found the fraud. And David, I want to press charges for everything. The Metropolitan Charity Ball was the last gasp of the Montgomery social calendar. Despite their bankruptcy being public record, Victoria had insisted they attend. She had scraped together the last of her hidden cash reserves, money she should have used to pay her lawyers to buy a table. Her logic was desperate but consistent. If we look like we are finished, we are finished. If we look like we are merely restructuring, the investors will come back. The ballroom at the plaza was suffocatingly warm, smelling of expensive perfume and roasted duck. Victoria sat at table 12, her back rigid. She was wearing her emerald necklace, the one piece of jewelry she had claimed was lost during the asset seizure. Charles was drinking his third martini, his eyes glazed. Ethan and Tiffany were bickering in hushed tones over who had forgotten to charge the Tesla, which was now their only vehicle. Stop slouching, Victoria hissed at Ethan. Senator Sterling is walking by. Smile. Ethan forced a grimace that looked more like a spasm. Mother, everyone knows. Look at them. They're whispering. He was right. The elite of New York were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. People were glancing at table 12, then leaning in to their neighbors, covering their mouths with champagne flutes to hide their gossip. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. A hush fell over the room, starting at the entrance and rippling outward like a wave. Victoria turned her head, annoyed. Who has arrived? The mayor? It wasn't the mayor. Walking down the grand staircase was Isobel Carter. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame, with a neckline that was daring yet elegant. On her arm was not a date, but David Ross, the ruthless attorney known for dismantling corporations, but it was what was projected on the massive screens behind the stage that caused the silence. Usually, these screens showed the charity's logo. Now, the feed had been cut. A video was playing. It was grainy footage. Security camera footage. Victoria squinted. It looked like an office. A lab. The audio crackled over the ballroom speakers. I don't care about the ethics, doctor. I am paying you to alter the results. The boy cannot be a Montgomery. If my son finds out he's the father, he'll stay with that waitress. I need a document that says 0% probability. The voice was unmistakable. It was Victoria's. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, and the sound of 100 phones being raised to record the moment. Victoria froze. Her blood turned to ice. That was the meeting she had with Dr. Eris at Genetics 7 years ago. She didn't know there was a camera. On the screen, the doctor's voice replied, Mrs. Montgomery, this is highly illegal. If the medical board finds out, they won't, Victoria's recorded voice sneered, because you're going to take this $50,000 in cash, and you're going to print the PDF. The video cut to black. Then, a single image appeared. The receipt Isobel had found in the nursery, signed by Victoria. Turn it off, Charles screamed, standing up and knocking over his chair. This is slander. Turn it off. It's not slander if it's evidence, Charles. A voice boomed from the stage. Isobel stood at the microphone, looking down at table 12 like a vengeful goddess. 7 years ago, Isobel said, her voice steady and amplified through the hall, Victoria Montgomery committed fraud to disinherit her own grandson. She destroyed a family to save her image. Tonight, I'm returning the favor. Victoria stood up, trembling with rage. You little witch, you hacked the system. I'll have you arrested. Actually, a deep voice came from the main entrance doors. We're here to do the arresting. The doors swung open. 6 officers from the NYPD's white-collar crime division marched in, led by Detective Miller. They didn't stop at the edge of the room. They walked straight to table 12. Victoria Montgomery? Detective Miller asked, holding up a badge. Yes, Victoria stammered, clutching her pearls. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and bribery. We also have a warrant regarding the embezzlement of funds from the Montgomery Family Trust. Embezzlement? Charles looked at his wife, his face draining of color. Victoria, what did you do? I did it for us, Victoria shrieked as an officer grabbed her wrists. I did it to keep the house, to keep the lifestyle. You were losing money, Charles. I had to move funds. By stealing from the children's trust? Ethan asked, standing up. My trust? You're weak, Ethan, Victoria spat, her mask of civility finally slipping completely. You would have spent it on that waitress. I saved this family. The officer clicked the handcuffs onto Victoria's wrists. The cold steel against her skin was the only reality left. Charles Montgomery, the detective continued, we'll need you to come in for questioning regarding your knowledge of these transactions. I knew nothing, Charles cried, backing away. She handles the books. Tell it to the judge, Miller said. As they dragged Victoria out of the ballroom, she thrashed and screamed, her heels dragging on the carpet. I'm a Montgomery. You can't do this. Isobel, you will pay for this. Isobel didn't move. She simply raised her champagne glass in a silent toast as her former mother-in-law was hauled away past the dessert table. Ethan stood frozen at the table. Tiffany was nowhere to be seen. She had grabbed her purse and slipped out the kitchen exit the moment the handcuffs appeared. Ethan looked up at the stage. He locked eyes with Isobel. He looked like a lost child. He took a step toward her, his mouth opening to say something. Perhaps sorry, perhaps help me. Isobel turned her back on him and walked off the stage. The applause that followed wasn't for the charity. It was for the performance of a lifetime. 3 months later, the winter had been harsh, but inside Oak Hollow, it was warm. The renovations were nearly complete. Isobel had stripped the heavy, dark velvet drapes and replaced them with light linen. The oppressive oil paintings of frowning ancestors were in storage, replaced by vibrant modern art and Noah's framed drawings. Isobel sat in her home office, formerly Charles's den, reviewing the quarterly earnings for Phoenix Interiors. Business had tripled since the gala incident. Everyone wanted their home designed by the woman who took down the Montgomery empire. The intercom buzzed. It was Jenkins, who Isobel had hired back as a state manager with a significant raise. Miss Carter? Jenkins's voice crackled. There is a gentleman at the gate. He says he knows you. He says he's Noah's father. Isobel paused, her pen hovering over the paper. She had expected this. She just hadn't expected it to take 3 months. Let him in, Jenkins. But tell him to wait on the porch. He doesn't cross the threshold. Understood. Isobel walked to the front window. She saw a beat-up Honda Civic, a rental, likely pull up the long driveway. It looked tragically out of place next to the pristine landscaping. Ethan got out. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his suit was ill-fitting, and he had the desperate, shifty look of a man who had been sleeping on friends' couches. Isobel opened the front door, but blocked the entrance. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Ethan, she said. No emotion, just acknowledgement. Isobel, Ethan breathed, looking at her. He looked past her, into the warm, golden glow of the foyer, the house. It looks amazing. You really fixed it up. I did, she said. What do you want? Ethan shifted his weight. I wanted to see you. And the boy, Noah. His name is Noah, not the boy. Right, Noah. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Look, Isobel, I know I messed up. I know my mother is a monster. I testified against her, you know. I helped the DA put her away. She got 10 years. I know, Isobel said. I read the transcript. You testified to save your own skin, Ethan. Immunity from prosecution in exchange for turning on your mother. It wasn't noble. It was survival. Ethan flinched. I had no choice. She controlled everything. I was a victim too. You were a grown man, Isabel said, her voice sharpening. You were 30 years old when you watched them kick me out. You stood there and drank your scotch while your wife and newborn were thrown into the rain. You aren't a victim, Ethan. You're a coward. I want to make it right, Ethan pleaded, stepping closer. I'm his father. I have rights. Actually, you don't, Isabel countered. You signed the birth certificate, yes, but you also signed a document 7 years ago, legally disowning him based on the fraudulent DNA test. You surrendered your parental rights to avoid paying child support. Remember? Ethan went pale. He remembered. It was another paper Victoria had shoved in front of him, and he had signed it to stop her yelling. I can fight that. The test was fake. The surrender is void. You can try, Isabel said calmly. But lawyers cost money, Ethan. And from what I hear, Tiffany cleaned out your joint account before she filed for divorce and moved to Cabo with her yoga instructor. Ethan slumped. It was true. He had nothing. I have nowhere else to go, Isabel, he whispered, tears filling his eyes. I'm your husband. Or I was. Doesn't that mean anything? It means I learned a valuable lesson about self-reliance, she said. Just then, the sound of running feet came from the hallway behind Isabel. Noah came skidding into view, holding a soccer ball. Mom, Jenkins said, he'd play goalie for me. Can I go out back? Noah stopped when he saw Ethan. He looked at the man on the porch, the man who shared his eyes, his nose, his chin. Ethan's face lit up. Noah? Hi. It's me. I'm your dad. Noah stared at him. He tilted his head, analyzing the stranger with the same sharp intellect Isabel possessed. My dad? Noah asked. Yes, Ethan said, a sob catching in his throat. I've missed you so much. Noah looked at Isabel. Mom, is this the guy who lived here before us? Isabel nodded slowly. Yes, Noah. This is Ethan. Noah looked back at Ethan. He didn't run into his arms. He didn't cry. He looked at Ethan with the innocent, brutal honesty of a child. Why didn't you come when I had the chicken pox? Noah asked. Ethan blinked. What? Or when I broke my arm, Noah continued. Or when we lived in the basement and the heater broke? Mom said you were busy? Were you busy for 7 years? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was no lie big enough to cover that gap. Ethan stammered. It's okay, Noah said, shrugging. We don't need you. Mom bought the house, and Jenkins plays soccer with me. You can go home now. Noah turned around and ran back down the hall, shouting, Jenkins, I'm ready. Ethan watched him go, his heart shattering in his chest. That rejection hurt more than the bankruptcy. It hurt more than the divorce. It was the absolute confirmation that he was irrelevant. Isabel stepped back, preparing to close the door. He's a smart kid, Isabel said. Isabel, please, Ethan begged, putting a hand on the door. Can I sleep in the guest house? Just for a week? Until I get on my feet? Isabel looked at him. She remembered the nights she slept on a mattress on the floor of the laundromat back room. She remembered begging Victoria for one night of shelter. No, Isabel said. But it's raining, Ethan said, gesturing to the gray sky. Isabel looked up. A light drizzle was starting. I know, she said. I left your suitcase under the gazebo at the end of the driveway. It should keep your things dry, if you hurry. Ethan stared at her, the realization of the full circle hitting him like a physical blow. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious, Isabel said. Goodbye, Ethan. She closed the heavy oak door. She heard the lock click. She stood in the foyer for a moment, listening. She heard Ethan's footsteps scuffling away on the gravel, slow and heavy. She walked into the living room. Noah was outside through the French doors, laughing as he kicked the ball toward Jenkins. The fire was crackling in the hearth. The house wasn't cold anymore. It was filled with life, warmth, and the sweet silence of safety. Isabel sat on the sofa and picked up her tea. She took a sip. It was the best cup of tea she had ever tasted. 5 years had passed since the doors of Oak Hollow were shut in Ethan's face. The estate, once a symbol of old money and exclusion, had transformed under Isabel's ownership. It had become the headquarters of the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit she launched to help single mothers navigate legal battles and financial crises. The East Wing, where she had once been thrown out, was now a temporary sanctuary for women who had nowhere else to go. Isabel stood on the balcony of the master suite, watching the sun set over the gardens. The weeds were long gone, replaced by vibrant beds of hydrangeas and roses. The fountain, once dry and filled with dead leaves, now bubbled cheerfully, the sound drifting up on the evening breeze. Her phone buzzed. It was an alert from a news app. Former socialite Victoria Montgomery, released from federal prison. "I have nothing left," she claims. Isabel tapped the article. There was a photo of Victoria leaving the facility. She looked frail, her hair gray and unkempt, clutching a plastic bag of belongings. There was no limousine waiting for her. No paparazzi were fighting for the shot. Just a single freelance photographer documenting the final whimper of a dying legacy. The article noted that her sons had not appeared to pick her up. Ethan was reportedly working as a shift manager at a car rental agency in New Jersey, living in a studio apartment. He had never remarried. The article mentioned he spent his weekends drinking at local dive bars, telling anyone who would listen that he used to own the big house on the hill. Isabel locked her phone and slipped it into her pocket. She felt no spike of joy, no rush of adrenaline. The fire of hatred that had fueled her for a decade had burned itself out, leaving behind a quiet, unbreakable peace. She didn't need to gloat. The universe had balanced the scales with terrifying precision. "Mom?" Isabel turned. Noah stood in the doorway. He was 12 now, tall and lanky, with a kindness in his eyes that no Montgomery had ever possessed. He was holding a tie. "I can't get this knot right," he admitted, sheepish. "Come here." Isabel smiled. She stepped inside and began to deftly knot the silk tie. Tonight was the annual Phoenix Gala, held right here on the lawn. But unlike Victoria's stuffy, judgmental parties, this one was filled with laughter, diversity, and genuine connection. "Are you nervous about your speech?" Noah asked, watching her face. "A little," Isabel admitted. "It's hard to tell people where you came from when the beginning is so ugly." "It's not ugly," Noah said firmly. "It's cool. You're like a superhero. You had a villain, you had a struggle, and then you won." Isabel tightened the knot and smoothed his collar. She looked at her son, the boy Victoria had tried to erase. The boy Ethan had been too weak to claim. He was brilliant, compassionate, and entirely hers. "We won," Isabel corrected. "We did it together." They walked down the grand staircase together. The foyer was filled with light. Jenkins was at the door, greeting guests, donors, beneficiaries, artists, and friends. When he saw Isabel and Noah, he beamed with pride. As Isabel walked out onto the terrace to thunderous applause, she took a moment to look back at the house. The stone walls no longer felt cold. The windows were no longer judging eyes. It was just a building. The power wasn't in the bricks or the address or the name on the deed. The power was in the woman standing on the steps. She took the microphone, looked out at the sea of supportive faces, and began. "They told me I was nothing," Isabel said, her voice ringing out into the night. "They told me this house was a fortress I could never breach. But they forgot one thing. You can kick a queen out of her castle, but you can never take the crown off her head if she earned it herself." Far away, in a dimly lit bus station, Victoria Montgomery sat on a plastic bench, reading a discarded newspaper. She saw the photo of Isabel on the front page, radiant and triumphant at Oak Hollow. Victoria crumpled the paper, tossed it into the trash can, and closed her eyes. The rain began to fall against the station windows, cold and unrelenting. And that is how Isabel Carter turned her darkest night into her brightest victory. It took 10 years, a lot of tears, and a will of iron, but she didn't just get even she got everything. The Montgomerys thought that wealth and status made them untouchable. They thought they could throw a mother and her child away like garbage. But they learned the hard way that when you push someone to rock bottom, you're only giving them a solid foundation to build an empire. What do you think? Did Isabel go too far by buying their house and kicking them out? Or was it the perfect poetic justice? And would you have let Ethan back in for just one night? Or would you have left him in the rain like she did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and sweet revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on today, because they might own the ground you walk on tomorrow.